Okay, welcome back, everybody. In the past, we have talked in some episodes about how we're influenced by other people, usually people in authority, because, well, sometimes we're dependent on them, like a child is with their parent. Sometimes we believe we're dependent on them, like we are with governments and government institutions. And today we want to talk about what happens when that trust is abused. What kind of person does that? What kind of person does that happen to? And how unconscious do these things happen? Because I have a theory that I'll get to later. But for now, Steve and I just want to give you the disclaimer that we're no experts on this kind of stuff, neither in the academic sense nor in the sense that we've talked to lots of people about this. We just have some of our own experience, which are not vast, but we like to talk about these things and help each other with our experience and our thoughts and our ideas. And if those things can help you as well, then even better.
Yep.
But just putting all these things into words themselves help me because I don't ever script these episodes. I just think of a few things and we might use them, we might not.
Yeah, that's what I like about it. So it's organic. And again, we've talked about it before where it can lead to a bit of chaos and we go down different tangents. But you know what? That's nice sometimes just to have that open level of discussion where we can just go down those things. And we try to bring it back, as you know. But if not, it's fine. We just have a discussion and it's good. And it doesn't need to be too regimented.
Okay, so to start out with, Steve, I asked you, or I'm going to ask you now again,
Yeah.
what do you know about complex PTSD? So in case someone doesn't know, PTSD stands for post-traumatic stress disorder, a very well-known disorder. But what is the complex version of it?
So I did a tiny little bit of research because it's something that I don't think I've really ever heard of the complex side of things. Like obviously you hear of PTSD all the time. So I lit up a couple of videos this morning just to kind of have a browse. And if I'm honest, couldn't figure out from these videos the actual difference between PTSD and complex PTSD. Like
Okay.
I guess from the word complex, it's more complex. But I was a bit like, well, this is just what I've assumed PTSD actually is. So
Well,
that's an
give us some
interesting.
reference first and tell us what is PTSD.
Well, again, yeah, that's a post-traumatic stress disorder. It's yes, so you've had a traumatic experience, so something that has whether it's abuse, childhood abuse, been held hostage, had parents that are like cruel. There's even things like being at the workplace and being mistreated for years it can lead to being a traumatic experience, and then it's obviously post-traumatic. So it's what happens afterwards. It's what's occurring to you as an individual, to me as an individual, to us as individuals, as a result of that trauma and how that expresses itself.
Right.
And that can express itself in a number of different things. Again, they talked about dissociation, talked about like kind of relapsing into reliving those moments when something triggers it. They talked about how complete changing of the brain, like almost like it can rewire your brain because of the trauma, basically. And the obvious one, I guess, is suppression. Like the brain and body, which it's all part of the same thing ultimately, protects itself. It's there to protect itself. Like if these experiences are going to damage you and your ability to do things, often it just buries it. but that
Right.
isn't, or like that short term, that's okay, that you don't have to deal with it. But then again, it's still there. It still manifests itself through different ways, like sometimes lashing out behavior, angry behavior. Like again, depending on the individual, sometimes it is, I guess running away behavior, like flight or fight
Mm-hmm.
scenarios. And then you wouldn't know why because you've suppressed those things. So it's, again, in itself is very complex, but I'm not sure what next level that is it becomes to make it then see PTSD.
Yeah. A common scenario that I always associate PTSD with is military service.
Okay, yeah, that's, well, yeah, that's, yeah,
And from what I heard, what used to be called shell shock is now called PTSD,
yeah,
and it's had several names over the years. But scientists keep renaming these things,
yeah,
or it might not be the exact same thing. But many soldiers are traumatized in war, and then come home and bring the war home, basically.
yeah,
And then uh, I don't know exactly how it changes their lives. I assume they they try to recreate the order that they had in the military under duress. I mean, under difficult situations, and try to command their family or their co-workers. I don't know, these kinds of things.
it just manifests itself in different ways, doesn't it?
Yeah, and yeah, I didn't I didn't hear about complex PTSD until recently. The Wikipedia article goes into the question, what is the difference between
Yep.
PTSD and the complex version? And what I remember from that is basically that the complex version takes place over many years. It's a prolonged, consistent state of traumatization, whereas PTSD is more short term. And so, yeah, I was wondering also, where do you draw the line?
Yeah,
Because war service can go on for years,
yeah,
but um, I want to talk about the possibility of there being very subtle traumatization going on in all of society.
yeah.
And this is where we get into speculation,
Mhm.
more so than usual, because this is just
Again, how would you quantify it and how
something.
would you figure it out? So yeah, so
Yeah,
that's very difficult. But
yeah,
like chatting and discussing it, I guess, is a step close to that thing where we can see and highlight potential aspects to society which actually is very traumatic. That there might be a continuous trauma
yeah.
situation happening to most of society. Like I've used the term before, but I call a lot of what the younger generation are going through now is in the psychic war. Like their psyche, their
Mhm.
like brains are being bombarded with like so much information, so much different like almost abuse. Like again, it's like of how they're supposed to be. The last episode we published was the shoulds and shouldn'ts, and like how you should be doing things and how you should look and how you should behave. That is abuse. Like not giving people the freedom to be able to express themselves or feel that they as an individual are accepted or loved because they don't fit into what should be the right way. That's abuse. Like that's a traumatic experience. And everyone's different, so everyone can a lot of people just be like ignore it, blah blah. But for those of us that are more emotionally sensitive, that can actually be, yeah, hugely damaging.
Right. Yeah. I think I am more sensitive than others to this kind of signal. Um, I was just reminded that Freud said when you, like, in your formative years, I mean there are many of them, but the very early ones,
Yeah,
you incorporate the messages from authority figures into your superego, and they what is something like a conscience, um, and then that stays with you for the rest of your life. And I guess that's why many people are still trying to please their parents, even when the parents might already be dead, and things like that.
That's an interesting thing, actually. Yeah, I mean, yeah, the constant state to
So you no
to
longer have someone over you telling you that you did something wrong or
be
that you need to
still.
change something. It's inside of you now,
Yeah,
and it's a dialogue that many people aren't even aware of that is
yeah,
happening. So on this show, we like to talk about awareness a lot, and I think that's a super important step that you can take to even just become aware of the voice or voices in your head,
yeah.
and they're not usually well, and for me, they're not articulate. They're not
Well, it's just
sounds
impulses
or
almost.
words.
Yes, impulses and behaviors, aren't they?
Yeah,
That we've been programmed potentially to need to obey. And
and
again, a lot of it comes from fear. Well, again, it's fear. A
we
lot of it
usually
comes
don't
from
notice the messaging or the impulses that you say until it becomes physical. So why
yeah,
are my shoulders tight?
yeah,
Why am I um, having digestive problems? And then this is the very last stage of a whole chain of events that happens inside of you without you noticing. But you can become aware of them.
yeah,
And then you can, with time and effort, learn to change them. And then you can turn an inner critic into an inner champion. That's what I'm working towards. Um, you know how when you are starting to walk, everyone is on your side and excited for you. And when you fail, they say, oh just try again. And they're patient with you and they encourage you and they're excited with you when you do have little successes. But later in life, when you try to achieve things, like, for example, building your own business, people will be, I don't know what the word is.
cynical and critical of
Yeah,
it. Yeah,
they'll be just the opposite.
yeah.
They'll say things like, "Oh, don't do that. It doesn't work." Or
It's too risky, or yeah, again, fears. Like, yeah,
anyway, to get back to complex PTSD, so I think there are many factors that can make it complex. So, like I said, the the number of events or the duration of
yeah,
the trapped situation that you find yourself in, being treated badly or like just being kept from unfolding your potential for long periods of time, and being kept from establishing the awareness necessary to free yourself from that. No one other than yourself can free yourself from it. So even though you're not responsible for being in that trap, you are responsible for escaping it.
yeah. That's a tough one.
Yeah,
That's a real tough one. Like that is like I guess the biggest hurdle for most people with it because it's easier to just be like, oh, I'm fine, it's okay. To then confront and face the trauma, it by doing that you experience the trauma again. Like you almost have to experience it again to then work through it. Um,
yeah,
and that only really is triggered by when you like well consciously triggered um by if you actually face it and start to work through it. And again, this as we say, we're not academics, we're not professionals. There's many different ways to work through these things with professionals in a way that is safe and healthy. Again, it can be done ourselves, obviously, but again, it's that can actually be very risky at times, depending on the trauma. So, I guess a disclaimer that
mm,
if you are wondering if you're struggling from PTSD in any way, again, maybe consult professionals, try and get help, and have support while doing it, while working through it, because there it is
yeah,
out there, and even just friends, even just a friend to talk to about it and stuff that will understand. It's very important to have these things and not just, I guess, not just open up the wounds without any sort of safety nets, because that can be dangerous.
yeah. Support is vital and helpful, but there comes a time when you need to differentiate. Am I becoming dependent on my support?
Yep.
Or is this actually going towards independence?
Yeah.
And some steps you do need to take on your own.
Yep. No, I agree.
When I was a child, I went to a farm with a school class and watched sheep being shorn. And that was fun to watch. But the sheep was uncomfortable. It didn't want to go through that. It was in a compartment, with wooden walls, just maybe to the height of the sheep itself.
Yeah.
And on one side there was a swinging wooden door to let the sheep in. And I asked the farmer, or the people shearing it, why doesn't the sheep try to escape? It obviously doesn't want to be here. And they said it thinks that it can't. It thinks that it's trapped. They didn't have to hold it down or have any constraints for it. Just this enclosure was enough for it to remain calm and endure the shearing. And I said, but the door swings really easily. It could just run out. And they said, it's enough for the sheep to see the door as a wall. It doesn't understand that it's on a hinge and it's easy to push against. And so it believes that it's trapped, and that is enough for it to stay in place and undergo this procedure. And so we cannot escape a prison until we realize that we are in one.
Yep. And that we realize that we can, that we have to believe that we can escape it.
Let's try to explain what kind of prison we might be talking about. And this is very subjective. This is different for everyone. You might think that we're exaggerating. I always try to be careful when I listen to conspiracy theorists about what might be going on, because it can trigger a fear in me and lead me to actions that are just not proportionate to the actual danger. But then again, an imagined fear or an imagined danger is very real.
Yeah.
So it's not to be taken lightly either.
Yeah. Well, in a way, as I say, all fear is imagined. No, that's wrong. All fear is perceived, I guess, and therefore the response may take place, but it's up to us, I guess, our conscious state to be able to be like, no, that like to try and get control over it and just be like, or process it in a healthier way to rationalize it. And again, that's complex in itself to try and get to that stage in life. But yeah, it's so easy. It's so easy for, again, these fears to I guess take control or have a traumatic outcome. Because
there are physical dangers that we can't deny. So when you're in danger of being hurt or killed, but I'm reminded of a quote by Gandhi. I don't care if you slowly kill me over decades or shoot me, that it's still the same violence. And so I believe that there is subtle violence going on, that it's very hidden, but that a lot of it happens inside our heads. So we need to become aware of it so that we can change it. But where's the crossover? Where does the influencing happen so that we get these messages from the outside and then repeat them to ourselves over and over, and thereby keeping the fear alive and the imaginary danger real to ourselves? What kind of messages can do this to us?
Good question. I guess when I always go to his body image, I probably talk about that a lot, where it's like I see around me just how many people that I know have very unhealthy perspectives on their bodies. because that's what they're told constantly. That's what they're constantly. That's the attack. That's the messages they're getting given from people that want to make money. Ultimately, people that want to make money through fad diets, through like what other things? Clothing. I guess it's and the need for happiness through the material things. So if you feel depressed, then it's like because of your body or something, then you'll want to go and buy something because that makes you happy. Like you get that oh, I've got something nice for myself, did something good. That's a common thing that happens in society at the moment. And there's an attack, as you say, it's an attack on our well-being and our perspective. And again, it's constant. It's disgusting how it's not even subtle anymore. Like we know it exists, we see it every day. How again, media and everything just try to traumatize people, basically. Like it's what we're talking about. Like people have trauma-related responses or just trauma inside them because of these things. And I'm constantly just having to like be like, no, like that image that have been shown is a false perspective. You like everybody's body is different. Like it's supposed to be. And that in itself is beautiful. Like and there's no like reason ultimately why we should think differently. But again, we're programmed over from day one, like to perceive ourselves, even from parents and stuff. Like parents is a massive one, actually, to be fair. The amount of people that I know whose parents like constantly comment on their either like how they look, their weight, their clothing, whatever, as if that parent has a right to say that kind of thing. That authority figure has a right to judge their children or other people's children or whatever on their looks or what they wear. Bizarre.
Yeah, these things distract us from us discovering who we are.
Yeah.
And what actually gives us value. And Wayne Dyer put it like this: so what kind of distractions are there? You gave some examples, and we can categorize them more broadly. What I have defines me. What I have achieved defines me. So things like money, fame, promotions, and how other people perceive me, what other people think about me defines me. I think that's how we all grow up.
Yeah.
I've often been afraid of what other people think about me when I speak, like when I explain something. So I guess that means I have identified myself with my intellect and my, I don't know, an appearance of authority in an intellectual way. You talked about image, so people identify with what other people think about them when they see their body, and Hollywood does a lot to manipulate us into believing that that is the standard, and you are less than the standard. I don't know.
Yeah.
And they don't even have to do it explicitly. Actually, I think it's
just
more insidious if it's not explicit.
Yeah.
Because it's repetitive, it is subtle. You know, I try as much as possible to stay away from commercials because I have learned that repetition is a very effective way of forcing a message into your subconscious. And once it's there, you have a lot less control over it, you know, over getting rid of it.
Yeah, it's so hard to get rid of once it gets embedded.
And so I think that's one reason that ads are repeated in the same form over and over for months. You know, they're not many different versions on them to keep you interested. No, they're the same over and over to hammer it in.
Yeah.
Okay, next, let's talk about the influence of governments on us,
Yeah.
but in the indirect way. So, I don't have a lot to do with government, or state-wide organizations directly. But what messages do we get told about them when we're young? The police is there to protect us.
Yeah.
Doctors are there to heal us. Taxes are there to fund these things and make them available to people who can't afford them as much. In Germany, this is called solidarity. What else? Politicians are there to make decisions on our behalf.
Yeah. They're supposed to represent.
So that we're not so busy and bogged down with politics and this big decision making, so that we can concentrate on what's important to us. And often we don't even need to hear the reasons behind them, because we just think, oh, I'm so busy with my own job and my own family. I'm glad to hand over these responsibilities to someone else. Voting makes sure that only good people get to make decisions on our behalf. Stuff like that. And where did we hear them? From school teachers, from parents?
Good question. I guess mostly.
It's so long ago that I'm not even sure anymore. But I do have these beliefs inside of me, and only in the last few years have I started to question them.
Yeah, like that's a really interesting question, because it's like it's just there. You just know that you're supposed to vote. You're supposed to have your voice heard that way. Yeah. I guess I've never been massively involved in politics again, and that's an interesting way they, I guess, influence us, is to be like, oh, it's just politics, don't worry about it.
Yeah, you're not supposed to get involved. You're just supposed to participate.
Yeah.
And keep the legitimacy up.
Yeah.
I remember my mother telling me that if I don't go to school, the policeman will come to our house. And I don't know if I think eventually they might.
Oh yeah. Again, same here.
But first, there would be calls and letters, of course.
Of course, there'll be social workers involved and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. But that message just tells me there is a law, and you are a bad person if you don't live by it.
Yeah.
And we equate legitimacy with legality, or even morality.
Yes, if it's law, therefore it's right.
Yeah.
Which is totally obviously wrong. I didn't realize, so we've got a lot of strikes going on recently in this country and currently, which I'm all for and have massive respect and love for those that are doing it at the moment. But I didn't realize that there was I guess in the 80s under Thatcher, there's a trade union law which stops all of them striking at the same time to protect the country. And it's like, no, that just makes it more difficult for workers to get their actual rights and equality. And I didn't realize. I was just baffled. I was like, holy crap, that's disgusting that law exists. And so these trade unions and having to schedule their strikes at different times or try to make them on the same days, because they can't actually do it, organize it together. They can't be organized together. It makes it more difficult to actually work together to get good, proper pay and proper standards of work environment. And it's so subtle, because again, most of us don't realize it. Again, I had no idea. I had no idea it was there. The general population probably have no idea that that's how it works.
Yeah.
We're just told not to worry about it, but again, laws. And it's under the guise of that's what's right to protect the country. So that the infrastructure doesn't collapse. The infrastructure should collapse if it's wrong.
Mm-hmm.
If it's not providing the basic necessities like heat and food and shelter for its population, which it isn't currently providing. And it shouldn't be so complicated to try and get a government to change the laws so that actually people are protected and get their rights, get human rights.
Yeah, I think that way about banks. I think if they make bad decisions with their customers' money, they should crash.
Yeah,
They should not
not be bailed out.
Yeah, we don't depend on them to
No.
have a decent life or an organized society. We don't need them.
It'll change things for a while, be very difficult,
Yeah,
but it
sure.
would, we would find a way. But again, people are like, they're in their safety net of, again, the rich don't want to lose all their power, basically, ultimately,
Yeah.
and the banks don't want to lose all their power, and so they kind of hold each other to hostage, like to ransom even, where the politicians will be favored by the banks and be supported if they support them, and vice versa. So and it's just it's like a mafia almost.
I never, well, until recently, it was really difficult to imagine how life could, or how our financial life could be organized without banks. But then 2009, someone decided they had enough.
Yep.
And they're smart enough to create their own financial system.
Yep.
And it's been growing slowly, but it's getting the attention of the entire world.
Yeah.
And pretty soon, enough people will realize that they can be their own bank and they do not need centralized institutions to hold their money for them and to facilitate transactions. This can all be done decentralized over the internet.
Yep. Well, there's talk of, again, well, it's a bit dangerous because government's still creating digital currency, but like there's talk this year of by next year the UK might have a digital pound. So we'll see. But there is a way
they're
out.
called central banks digital currencies, and they would get rid of the need of commercial banks. The individual citizen would be in direct contact with the central bank for all of their transactions. So that's already scary, but the other implications are that, isn't money digital already? Well, yes, but when we say digital money now, we mean programmable money. So that central institutions can decide how much of your money can you withdraw, how much can you use for what purpose, who are you transacting with, or do we need to freeze that? That's already in place to a degree, but it will be so much more controllable in the future.
Well, again, all this, to go back a little bit, all this comes down to perceived protection, that we are not intelligent enough to make our own choices, and maybe we're not, but we should be allowed to. Like, it comes down to that in many ways. We should have the freedom to, make these choices ourselves. And
when I lived in Scotland, there was the vote about whether Scotland should be a separate country, and I voted in favor of that. And I also thought, England is so much stronger economically, so that Scotland heavily depends on it, and I think that was a huge factor in many people's decision to stay.
There was a lot of propaganda around that if Scotland left, that it wouldn't be able to survive by itself. Like, there's a lot hammered into us that it's better. Again, the irony, it's better to be together. The government pushed, like the UK government pushed, it's better to be together. And then we have Brexit, which they pushed for us. We should be separate. It's better to be separate. Right. That hypocrisy and, again, using fear in the opposite ways for their agenda. It's not about, they don't care about us. They don't care that, whether the individuals, people wanted to stay or leave. They just knew that for themselves as a government, it was better for Scotland to be still in the UK.
And we do see chaos because of Brexit. The UK, it does have a lot of new problems because of it.
Well, we've lost hundreds of billions because of Brexit.
And I think Scotland would have gone through hard times if it had separated. But give people a chance to create their own solutions.
Yeah. Well, there's still, again, they were separate from the UK, but they still would have been in the EU. Right. That's what's interesting. They wanted to still be in the European Union, so they still had that, I guess, global connection.
I think if they separated now, they would apply to become a EU
Yes,
member.
yep. They're very much for that. Because again, there is a important line between, again, having independence and being separate, but also, again, being part of the global infrastructure. Both things are important.
Mm-hmm.
And it depends on what things are attached to it, because they like being attached to the UK. Currently, in the last 10, 15 years, the government that has been in place has not been in the same perspectives as Scotland. Scotland has barely voted the same as the rest of the UK in its sort of voting.
Mm-hmm.
But yet they have to go along with whatever the rest of the countries in the United Kingdom vote for, and so they're being forced to, unfortunately, still be a part of that. But yeah, we're stuck in they're stuck in that sort of loop at the moment. But again, going back to some of what we've talked about earlier, the attacks on, I guess, people's fears is the strongest method of control.
Mm-hmm.
And we talked about more subtle worries and concerns and that sort of influence us, and day-to-day living has that. You talked about the different ways we're perceived and stuff, and job security, job promotions. That's hugely traumatizing for most people. Every day they go into work and they have these expectations put on them, and usually at the moment more and responsibilities. Most people I know are doing their job is now the equivalent of 2 people's jobs a few years ago, if not 3 people's jobs. The responsibilities they've put on them, the stresses they've put on them, they have to do the workload of what was more people. And so, yeah, that stress and that it is trauma. Like it is, again, because over a long period of time. It is day to day, week to week, month to month, year to year. And it's no wonder people are constantly having anxiety or, again, PTSD. Like a lot of people start to, again, fear work. Like we talk about, like in this country, they talk about, oh, people are lazy. They're not wanting to work. They're not wanting to do the difficult jobs. And like it's disgusting because these people do want to work. They just want to work in something that isn't so exhausting or taxing or painful for them.
Mm-hmm.
And like yeah, it's makes you feel less of a person because you can't keep up to whatever their standard is, or what we're supposed to do, and that stops us from, I guess, being ourselves in a way. Like this is something that we've talked about before, where it's important for us to our individuality, our self, well, our being, our self-esteem. If it's constantly being bombarded with how we should do things, it does create trauma. It does. It makes us feel inadequate, and where we should be able to celebrate who we are and what we want to do as people. We don't get
There's a
time to.
plan for us for almost our entire life.
Yeah.
And you're expected to follow it. And the last generation tells us about this plan because they were told about it. And it kind of works, but it does keep you inside a bubble. And you're distracted and can't discover yourself, things like that. And this plan is so consistent and without any breaks in it. So you grow up with your parents who tell you what is right and wrong. Then you have a teacher around you until you're, I don't know, 18 or so. Then you need to go to university because the education before that was not enough. And you get a piece of paper at the end that without it, no employer would ever hire you. And then you look for someone to give you work and to tell you what is right and wrong, and then you work for them the rest of your life, and you're supposed to get married to get this other piece of paper and have children. Well, that and some of that is things that we obviously want, and it's not all
again,
bad.
of course, it's not. Again, we're not saying. Yeah, that's important to address. To be fair, that actually these things are good thing. Again, it's how we perceive them ultimately. But if we want them, then cool, go for it. Have them. Make it take advantage that you can have these things. Again, like if you can find someone to, fall in love with, etc., or find the right sort of career path that is just one career path for your whole life, or some studying, whatever you want to do. But again, it's the fact that what are you making that choice consciously because it's going to lead to your happiness? Do you know it's going to lead to do you know that you will be happy in that environment? Because actually, a lot of people that either go to university, go into certain careers, have families, actually they're miserable. Like they're resentful, they're miserable, they feel trapped, and they deny it. They tell themselves, "No, this is good," because that's the way they cope. That's fair. But these big choices, we must make them with, I guess, all the things we talked about in mind. Because if we make them just because we have to do this is just the path that I'm supposed to take, yeah, it ends up repeating the cycle. So much unhappiness is had, so much like, again, trauma through parents being indifferent or abusive. Again, indifference is an abuse ultimately, neglect. Because they don't actually want it. They just thought they wanted it.
I think a big factor that plays into why we don't deviate from this plan is that we don't know what else there is. It's the big unknown.
Yeah, that's true.
It's the uncertainty that keeps you. And like I said earlier, with learning to walk and learning to create your own business, it is really. I mean, there are people who can help you create your own business,
Yeah.
but there's still a lot of uncertainty and a lot of things that you have to make mistakes to learn from,
Yeah.
rather than just following a plan. And actually, that's often better, more in the long run, to learn from making mistakes rather than trying to avoid mistakes in general.
Again, like habit is safety. Like we are routine is safety. So if when you, let's say for example, you go self-employed or you start your business or you do a job that's 9 to 5 and the rest of the time is yours. What do you do in that time? Like, do you have enough resources, aka money, to be able to necessarily do the things you want? And I guess that's where again creativity comes in. Again, you and going against the fear. Like I remember the first few years of like illness stuff and just be not knowing what to do, like because I was limited in my resources to go do things. I couldn't just go, hey, I want a new hobby to go skydiving, or I want a new hobby to go like fixing cars and doing them up or something. Like just like you need those resources. So you have to find things that aren't involved in that, which again I did, like creative writing and drawing, etc. There are things out there that you can do to fulfill your like purpose. Again, purpose is massively important. And so again, it's all these things we can individually balance, but it's now I know that we can try at least. We can do it. Like there's so many people are doing that now where they are getting lots of different jobs just to make some money so they can go on like go traveling for 3 months or for a year or whatever. I've got friends that, save enough money to go to Australia to go and work over there for like a year or two and experience these things where you get to, I guess, do what you want to do. Which again, to people from previous generations sounds selfish to them. They're just like, and again, part of that might just be because they don't understand, because again, it wasn't what they've done. And part of it might be resentful because they wish they could ultimately do that.
Jealousy.
Yeah. And again, it's subconscious sometimes, it's not necessarily active on the surface. Because we're lucky in many ways. Again, we talk a lot about how trapped we are at times. But we also are very lucky and fortunate. No generation has ever had this amount of freedom. Like, it's an interesting polarization, I guess. In many ways, we are, trapped and traumatized by the systems, but also there are many options available to us. It just takes an insane amount of energy and effort and luck to be able to, because there's a chaos factor, to be able to achieve what we want as individuals.
Would you go as far as to say that we are experiencing Stockholm syndrome?
No.
Where people are abused by their captors. So this was a case in Sweden, where the captors of a robbery with the hostages would not speak out against their captors in court, apparently because they shared their values, or they could put themselves in their shoes and understand why they did it, and so did not want to harm them. Could you say that, we've been talking about being trapped and captivated. Could you say that people who defend governments and royalty are in this illusion where they
it's a trauma response.
Where they believe it's necessary, and it's a bit painful, but it's the right thing because there's no better alternative.
I would agree. Again, I would agree. Many people are. Again, we can't analyze or find out, as we talked about earlier. We don't know the actual quantification of these things, but from an observational point of view, again, I looked up some of the Stockholm syndrome stuff as well. Again, just to refresh my mind, and how there's seems to be different styles of Stockholm syndrome. There seems to be that one you talked about where it could literally just be empathy. It could just be the fact that these people are trying to rob a bank because they need money to survive or to provide for their families, or they're in debt to the mafia. I don't know what the actual reasons were. Again, just making it up. And you can be like, okay, well, sure, that's of course they're going to do that. Or it could, you could be like, you're with those people, and because you're in a hostage situation, you have no freedom. You are contained. The only way to kind of process it properly is to start being like connected to something. You have to be connected to something, otherwise you're being abused. Like your rights have been taken away from you, and so you connect with your the person that's holding you hostage, because it's really the only thing there, and then you start to kind of like connect in that way because you don't see any other choice really. Because the other choice is being like, I have no choice and I'm going to die in this situation, and it can be a defensive mechanism. Again, it's very complex. So it's tough to know. It's tough to know in those situations. Again, there's other situations with Stockholm syndrome of like actual abuse, like serious abuse. Because again, being held hostage is an abuse. You're taking away your freedoms and stuff. But in that specific situation of just sitting in a bank for a few days with some people, it's scary and it's horrific, but I'm not trying to play that down. But it's very different from if you've been like abducted for 2 years and been sexually abused, been neglected in many ways. And so the Stockholm syndrome becomes more complex depending on the situation. But in terms of governments, then going back to that point with us as people, because I include myself in this, because I don't ever see myself as being massively different in my awakening. Like I consider myself to be 1% more sort of consciously aware than most people, but at the same time, there's so many behaviors and things that I do that are just conditioned by, again, the system. And so, I personally think we all have cases of Stockholm syndrome when it comes to governments. We bury our heads in the sand with so many things, like the fact that, we'll just not get too political maybe, but actually I'll just talk about the Russian-Ukraine war, but then even just like that situation where the government tells us how to behave and we just go, again, not all of us, but we just kind of like, okay, because in certain situations the government have been like, oh, we'll go in full guns blazing and stop the person. And again, it's more complex than just doing that, but they have to do that in certain situations that benefit them. If it doesn't benefit them, they'll not do it. And it's like, well, isn't all war bad? Shouldn't we be trying to stop all war? Like, why do we only get involved in some wars and not others, like directly? It's pretty and again, we're just told that, oh, it's best this way and yada yada yada. That's a bit of an extreme situation. Other one, NHS right now, our healthcare system. 2 years ago, we were clapping for carers. You know, every Thursday they told us that we had to go outside and clap for the NHS people to tell them how much we love and respect them for what they're going through during COVID. And I have my own personal opinions on that in itself, but that is such propaganda. That is such Stockholm syndrome, because everyone's just doing it because they're being told that's what's right. And then nurses go on strike, doctors go on strike, etc., etc. The government's like, oh, they're trying to tear apart our country. They're these nurses, and they're not doing what's right for the country, and turning on them. And it's the same people who are telling us to go clap for them are telling us to like neglect them and hate them for wanting to have better conditions and better pay. Again, not even better pay, like what they're by inflation's rate, what they should have. Like they're all taking pay cuts because of the economy, and the government's being like, no. And again, a lot of people will, without realizing, will be like, oh well, actually, should they be striking? It's probably bad for the strike. And you're like, no, stop. Like, don't let the government again do this. But for some reason, we have this desire to connect with the bigger establishment, the bigger system, or we are taught to connect to and listen to and obey, because I guess we would be punished otherwise, potentially.
Yeah, there are several factors driving us to do that. So one is we feel safe, or it's an illusion, but we feel like there are protectors, and the other one you mentioned is they can punish us if we leave, if we ignore them.
Yeah.
Yeah, those are some great examples. I think contradiction is a powerful thing to help people realize that they've been fed lies.
Yeah.
We're almost out of time. I want to get your opinion on one last thing. I wonder if we agree on this or not. When the Queen of England died recently, it was interesting to see some people sympathizing with the royal family and expressing their good feelings about royalty and the Queen on Facebook, for example. And I thought, wow, it's still more than I thought. I mean, the royal family has pretty much no political power. They are very symbolic, unlike other countries where royalty still is pretty involved in decision making. But still, in general, in Europe, there's no monarchy in the sense of how it used to be, where they have all power. No dictator that is also a king. But what is your opinion on people's sentiment about royalty?
It fascinates me. It blows my mind. If I'm from my perspective, like people make comments about royalty being like they do so much, they contribute so much for the economy, blah blah, and maybe they do. Maybe it's a good thing for that. But it's outweighed, in my opinion, by the symbolic nature of what they represent and what they've taken from us, and all the land they own, all the money they own, the fact that Charles whatever is King, I guess King Charles now.
Mm-hmm.
No, it wasn't him. No, it was Philip. It was when Philip when it was when Prince Philip died. His in was it his inheritance? No, it's sorry, forgive me for this. There's two things. One was to do with inheritance, and how they don't have to pay inheritance tax.
Oh,
They're
wow.
exempt from it because they're royalty. And also the will from Prince Philip it won't be made public for like 90 years or something
Huh.
because they're protecting, and that's technically illegal. Like under law, that's technically illegal. But because exemptions were made through like for various reasons, most likely because the amount of money that is actually controlled and owned by royalty, like it's insane. And so I don't think it outweighs it. So all this like perspective on, oh, let's all come together and have a national mourning baffles me. Like it absolutely baffles me. It's just a person.
Yeah.
Like some random person down the road who could have passed away, could have done way more good, helped way more people, done so much more like things that benefited the community, and pass away, and two people turn up to their like funeral. Like it's like like people won't come together for it. People just like, okay, it's someone's died. But for some reason, people queued for like days to pay respect to someone they never knew.
Yeah.
And again, that's all rhetoric. That's all, again, a propaganda of how we should treat the royals.
To me, they're like Kardashians.
Yeah, yeah,
Their fame is only an illusion. They don't contribute
yeah,
anything to society.
yeah,
What shocked me, for example, was when it turned out some of them are pedophiles
yep.
and nobody
Prince
cared.
Andrew, yep, yep. They all get swept under the carpet.
But
Again,
I
it's
was happy
the
to see some demonstration during the memorial stuff
yeah, there's
where
yeah,
they would shout out at Andrew, you're a creep
yeah,
and stuff. And
yeah,
then the police would take away those demonstrators and take them to court. And then the courts had to decide, do we or don't we incarcerate people who speak out against royals? That wasn't
yeah,
even clear.
yeah,
And from what I heard, it turned out that after some debate, they did allow free speech against royals.
yeah. But it's like again, it all comes, in my opinion, it all comes down to again fear. So, we all have been taught most of our lives to that these are good people that help our country, that stand for democracy because they gave up the throne in their way, like they gave up their powers, even though they're still there. That's good. And then we are told to respect them, etc. But we fear as a nation truth. And in my opinion, I mean, truth technically should be subjective, objective, sorry, but in many ways it's subjective. Then if we face the reality that we are being conned,
Yeah.
that these people are doing everything they can to have power, to keep their financial institutions, to keep their wealth, and not give it back to the people, then we realize that we're the problem. Have to take responsibility that we're the ones actually fueling this,
Yeah.
and we're scared to admit that. Like people are in denial, people don't want to admit that. People don't want to admit that there is much more happiness to be gained through getting to know the people around you, spending more time with you, like those community aspects, because it's an all illusion. Coming together for a national day of mourning, it's not real. I mean, again, like ultimately, who defines what's real? So maybe I should be less critical, but it just seems so shallow.
In another episode, I would like to talk about the thing you just mentioned, how our idea of how the world works, how our life works, what is necessary for us to have peace and a working economy and so on is all a house of cards.
Yeah.
And we can't imagine that these things could work any other way.
Yes. Again, fear of change, fear of difference.
And that the fear of the collapse is subconscious, and therefore we don't even realize why we support crazy claims in science, in medicine, in politics, in economics, in education, everywhere. We become irrational, and insane because of that. That's an interesting topic too. So I'm glad to see we do stand on the same side.
Oh yeah.
When it comes to royalty.
I get into a lot of trouble because again, a lot of people still do have a deep connection that they've created to these figureheads.
And we can talk more about where that might come from. I believe it comes from religion. I believe that if you need to go into history to understand more about why we have and want power structures, it comes from why is the Pope more more powerful than the emperor and stuff like that. And then power just gets passed on, and royal families are just rich mafia bosses, actually. That's why they're in power, not because there's some special person.
They took the power in the future. They claim it to be the divine nature from God, and that was enough to stay in those places. And again, it's politics. It's all dealings with people to stay in power, and conflicts. And the next 50 years will be interesting to see, because again, King Charles has come in this country, and if it does just wither away, because I don't think people actually wanted him to be king. Even people that supported the royal side of things, they were not actually wanting him to be king. They wanted to jump to William, but he's trying to hold on to some power and have some level of his time almost. So it'll be interesting. But it's also, like you say, it's Kardashians. It's a soap opera. So there's constantly things that happen that keep them relevant in the media, and again, propaganda, marketing, all these kinds of different things, all part and parcel of maintaining the status quo. And we're all about change. And
flexibility, growth,
adaptation.
Well, I'm encouraged by the changes, by the awakening that is happening in general. It's just a feeling I have. I don't speak to many people about this kind of thing. But when I see an opening, I do like to ask them. And it's encouraging to see. I think
there's a lot of hope.
There is reason for optimism.
There's definitely a lot of hope. Facing our fears, facing our traumas, over time, we will get there, and the change will happen.